She told me I was bad for her, but every time she smiled, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The first time I really noticed her, it was one of those ordinary afternoons that somehow feels like the universe decided to pause just for a moment. I had stepped outside to bring in the trash bins, half thinking about the emails I hadn't answered, when I saw her standing at the neighbor's gate. She was arranging potted plants, her hands brushing over the leaves with a careful, almost reverent touch. There was something about the way she moved that made the mundane seem deliberate. Each step she took was measured, graceful, as if she had all the time in the world, even though I knew she probably didn't. The sunlight caught her hair at just the right angle, warming the deep brown tones with flickers of gold. I had to look away for a second, embarrassed that I was staring, but she hadn't noticed. Or maybe she had, and she simply chose not to care. That quiet confidence, effortless, unassuming, pulled at me in a way I couldn't articulate. I lingered by the fence, pretending to tie my shoelaces, but really just watching her. Her laugh reached me, soft and unforced, carrying a warmth that made the world feel smaller, gentler. It wasn't loud or demanding of attention. It was the kind of laugh that seemed to belong to someone who had seen enough of life to know which moments deserved joy. She glanced over briefly, our eyes meeting for a fraction of a second. There was a flicker there, curiosity, amusement, maybe even a hint of recognition. But just as quickly, she returned to her plants. When she finally walked toward me, carrying a basket of herbs, our hands brushed. The contact was brief, casual, but enough to send a small ripple through me. The warmth of her fingers, the soft brush of her skin against mine, left an imprint I couldn't shake. I wanted to say something clever, but my words tangled somewhere between awe and nervousness. Instead, I smiled, letting my own presence speak in silence. She tilted her head, studying me with a gentle intensity. "You're always outside at the weirdest times," she said, her voice carrying a melodic lilt. It wasn't teasing exactly, more observational, like she was cataloging the small quirks of the world around her. I laughed softly, and for the first time that day, I felt like we shared a private understanding. There was a quiet electricity in the air, subtle but undeniable, like two magnets that had just recognized each other's pull. By the time she returned to her garden, I realized I couldn't look away. Something about her presence, the way she carried herself, the warmth of her attention, even the slight vulnerability I glimpsed when she paused to dust her hands on her apron, had planted a seed of fascination. I wasn't just noticing her. I was seeing her, truly seeing her, and I didn't want to stop. Even as I went back inside, the image of her lingered. That first encounter wasn't a spark or a lightning bolt. It was quieter, subtler, the kind of impression that burrows into your thoughts and refuses to leave. And I knew, almost instinctively, that I hadn't seen the last of her. A few days after that first quiet encounter, I found myself crossing paths with her again. This time, it wasn't a casual glance across the fence or a fleeting brush of hands. It was intentional. I had been carrying a bag of groceries up the driveway when she appeared, leaning slightly against her doorframe, arms crossed, an eyebrow raised in that way that felt both challenging and teasing. "You're bad for me," she said, her voice calm, almost amused, as if it were a fact I should already know. The words hit me differently than I expected. Part of me wanted to laugh. The other part was caught off guard by the seriousness hidden beneath the playful tone. There was a subtle weight to them, a hint that she was aware of something she didn't entirely want to admit. I asked, feigning offense, though my chest thumped just a little faster. "Me? Bad?" She shook her head, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Yes, you. You make me think too much," she said, letting her gaze linger on me longer than necessary. Her eyes were sharp yet soft at the same time, a mixture of curiosity and wariness that made it impossible to look away. I stepped a little closer, careful not to overstep, letting the air between us feel electric without forcing it. "Think too much can be dangerous," I replied, my voice low, carrying a teasing note I hoped would break through the tension. Or maybe it's just exciting. Her laugh this time was different, shorter, sharper, with just a hint of exasperation. She shook her head again, almost as if she were trying to ground herself. And yet, when she moved to set a basket of freshly watered flowers down, our hands brushed again, lingering a fraction longer than necessary. The warmth of her skin, the subtle pressure against my palm, sent a ripple through me that made my chest tighten pleasantly. For a moment, we simply stood there, caught in the small magnetic pull between familiarity and restraint. I noticed the way the sunlight played across her hair, highlighting strands of silver that added a quiet elegance to her presence. She shifted slightly, tucking a loose strand behind her ear, and I couldn't help but admire the careful grace in that simple gesture. "You really don't get it, do you?" she said finally, her tone softer now, almost vulnerable, though she quickly masked it with a smirk. "I'm supposed to resist you. I'm supposed to." She paused, her eyes flicking to mine, betraying the hesitation beneath her words. "I don't want you to resist," I said, keeping my voice gentle, observing the subtle changes in her expression. There was no rush, no pressure, just an acknowledgement of the tension that existed, a quiet recognition that we were dancing on the edge of something neither of us wanted to name aloud just yet. By the time she walked back inside, leaving the door slightly ajar, I realized that the playful conflict wasn't a barrier, it was a bridge. The teasing words, the brief touches, the hesitant smiles, they all hinted at something deeper, a connection that neither of us was ready to fully admit. And yet, I knew one thing for certain. I wanted to explore it, carefully, patiently, until the quiet fascination of our first encounter became something more. A week later, I found myself at her door with a cup of coffee in hand. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a casual gesture, a reason to cross the threshold between neighborly politeness and something more personal. She opened the door, her expression a mix of surprise and quiet warmth, and invited me in with a slight tilt of her head. The apartment smelled faintly of vanilla and old books, the kind of comforting aroma that made you feel immediately at ease. She gestured toward the small balcony, where a couple of chairs had been arranged to catch the afternoon sun. I set the coffee down, our fingers brushing briefly, the contact fleeting yet electric. She didn't pull away, simply allowing the moment to linger, and I realized that the tension between us had shifted, softened, perhaps, but no less charged. We sat side by side, the warm sunlight pooling over our laps. At first, the conversation was casual, small talk about errands, the changing weather, the plants she seemed to nurture with meticulous care. But slowly, as our words meandered, she began to reveal fragments of herself, past regrets, the loneliness she sometimes felt in quiet evenings, the small victories and disappointments that marked her life. I listened, trying not to interrupt, though every so often a question would slip out, not probing, but gentle, encouraging her to continue. And in those moments, I noticed the subtle ways she revealed herself, the way her hands fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve, the way her gaze softened when she thought I wasn't watching. Each movement, each hesitation, was a doorway into her inner world, and I felt honored to see it. At one point, she shivered slightly from the afternoon breeze, and I instinctively reached over to drape my jacket across her shoulders. She accepted it without a word, her fingers brushing against mine. It was a small gesture, but the warmth of her hand resting near mine lingered long after the jacket settled around her. Our eyes met, a quiet acknowledgement passing between us. The closeness was no longer just physical. It was emotional, deliberate, intimate. Time seemed to stretch, measured not in minutes, but in the subtle rhythm of shared laughter and quiet confessions. When she described moments of vulnerability, I could feel the depth of her honesty resonating, and it made me aware of my own desire to be equally open, equally present. I spoke carefully, sharing glimpses of my own uncertainties, the questions I carried about life, love, and where I fit into the world. She listened with rapt attention, her hand occasionally brushing mine in reassurance. By the time the sun dipped low, casting gold across the balcony, a sense of calm had settled over us. It wasn't a grand revelation or a dramatic confession. It was something quieter, deeper. We had opened a space between us where honesty and care could exist without judgment, where small touches carried more meaning than words. As I left that evening, jacket folded neatly under my arm, I felt a subtle shift inside myself. The fascination I'd felt before had grown into something warmer, more grounded. And though neither of us had yet named it, we both understood that this was the beginning of something more, an emotional bond that was quietly, irrevocably taking root. It was an ordinary evening, but somehow, the air between us felt charged. We had agreed to help each other with some small task, a stack of old boxes in her living room, a chore neither of us particularly wanted to do alone. Yet the simplest of activities became a stage for the tension simmering just beneath the surface. As I lifted a box, she stepped closer to guide me, her hand brushing against mine in the process. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, but it lingered long enough to send a shiver up my arm. I could feel the warmth of her fingers, soft and reassuring, and it made my chest tighten in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. There was a delicate push and pull between us, a magnetic draw neither of us wanted to name. She paused, glancing at me with a smile that held amusement and something quieter, more intimate. Her eyes lingered, tracing the line of my jaw, the tilt of my shoulder, and I caught myself holding her gaze a second longer than necessary. There was an unspoken acknowledgement of desire, subtle but impossible to ignore. For a moment, I imagined leaning closer, letting our proximity speak what our words dared not. But hesitation held me back, not fear of rejection, but the awareness of boundaries, of the delicate line we were treading. When she moved to adjust a curtain, our hands brushed again. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. I felt the electricity of that small touch, the warmth of her skin, the almost imperceptible tremor of her fingers. She laughed softly, a quiet, breathy sound that seemed to resonate in the room, and I realized she felt it too. That brief contact spoke volumes: curiosity, attraction, and a shared understanding of the unspoken. We exchanged glances that lingered longer than usual, each smile and pause weighted with meaning. It was in the little things, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear while our eyes met, the soft shift of her body closer when she handed me a box, the subtle tilt of her head, as if she were weighing what she wanted to say but didn't. Every movement carried intention, even when cloaked in casualness. I could feel my own restraint growing thinner. My hand itched to brush hers again, to reach out and close the tiny gap between us. Yet, at the same time, there was a strange comfort in the hesitation. Every withheld gesture made the moments we did share more electric, more meaningful. The push and pull, the tension, the nearly touching hands. It was a dance, delicate and intoxicating, that neither of us wanted to end. By the time the chore was done, the room felt smaller, warmer, more charged with what had passed between us. She smiled at me, just a little longer than necessary, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest, quiet but undeniable. We had crossed no explicit lines, yet the subtle tension, the fleeting touches, the long glances, had drawn us closer in a way that words could never fully express. As I left that evening, I couldn't stop replaying every glance, every brush of skin. The temptation lingered, unspoken but persistent, and I knew that our connection was becoming something deeper, something neither of us could resist for long. The evening had a softness to it that felt different, almost as if the world outside had dimmed to let our little space exist in its own bubble. We were sitting on her balcony, the fading sunlight pooling over our laps in gold and amber hues. I could smell the faint scent of jasmine from her small potted plants, mingling with the lingering warmth of coffee cups we had set aside. She leaned back in her chair, eyes half closed as she took a slow breath, and I realized I couldn't stay silent any longer. I had tried to let the connection grow naturally, letting subtle touches and lingering glances speak for me, but the truth had started pressing against my chest like an unspoken demand. I need to tell you something," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. She opened her eyes, focusing on me with that calm, attentive gaze that always seemed to read right through me. My fingers fidgeted with the hem of my sleeve as I continued, struggling to find the words that felt honest without overwhelming her. I can't stop thinking about you, I confessed, my eyes tracing her face as the words spilled out. Not just because you're beautiful or confident, but because of who you are. The way you see the world, the way you carry yourself, the way you let yourself be vulnerable sometimes. I feel like I'm drawn to all of that. And it terrifies me, because I know there's a lot to think about. The age difference, the world around us, but I can't deny how I feel. For a moment, she didn't say anything. The breeze ruffled her hair, and she tucked a loose strand behind her ear, her fingers brushing mine ever so slightly. That small touch, barely a brush, made my heart hammer. She exhaled slowly, and when she finally spoke, her voice was softer than I expected, almost hesitant. I felt it too, she admitted, her eyes glistening with quiet honesty. But I've been trying to ignore it. I know what people would think, and sometimes I wonder if it's wrong. But when I'm with you, it doesn't feel wrong. It just feels natural. Scary, yes, but real. Her words sent a shiver through me, not from fear, but from the weight of what she had just shared. We sat in silence for a few moments, letting the confession settle between us, letting the warmth of the balcony and the fading sunlight hold us. I moved just a little closer, careful not to crowd her, and she leaned in as well, until our shoulders brushed. The contact was subtle, but enough to make my chest ache with quiet longing. I want to be with you, I whispered, but I also want to make sure we do this right. Slowly, carefully. I don't want to rush what we have. Her smile was soft, tender, and her hand found mine, resting there without pressure, simply allowing the warmth to flow between us. Slowly, she agreed. Carefully. I want that too. In that moment, I realized that the hesitation, the inner conflict, the fear of stepping too far, none of it mattered. What mattered was the honesty, the trust, and the quiet intimacy we were building together. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where that connection could grow, slowly and beautifully, without apology. The rain started quietly, a soft patter against the windows that made the world feel smaller, more intimate. I was helping her carry laundry into the apartment when she paused, glancing outside at the downpour. The way her eyes caught the muted gray light made her look even more fragile and beautiful than usual, and I felt an almost physical pull toward her. "You're not going out in that, are you?" I asked, though I knew the answer was probably yes. She had that stubborn streak that made her irresistible. "I might," she said with a sly smile, "if you come with me." I hesitated for a heartbeat, aware of the tension that had been simmering between us for days. But there was a warmth in her eyes, a quiet invitation that made hesitation impossible. I nodded, and we stepped into the rain together, letting it soak our hair and clothes. The drops were cold, but her hand found mine instantly, small and tentative at first, then firmer as we walked. The contact sent a ripple of warmth up my arm, and I noticed her leaning slightly closer, as if she had been waiting for this, the moment where restraint could finally give way to connection. We stopped under the awning of a nearby tree, just close enough to be shielded from the heaviest drops. Our shoulders brushed, and I felt her heartbeat, quick and steady, against my own. For the first time, the hesitation and unspoken questions faded into the background, replaced by the undeniable clarity of how much we wanted to be near each other. "I've been trying not to think about this," she admitted softly, her voice almost drowned by the rain. "But I can't. I want this. I want you." Her words were a bomb and a spark all at once. I stepped closer, closing the remaining distance carefully, and she tilted her head toward me. Our foreheads touched first, a gentle, tentative contact that allowed both of us to savor the moment without rushing it. The warmth of her breath mingled with mine, and I felt the subtle pull of her body against mine, not in desire alone, but in trust, in acceptance, in a quiet surrender to what had been growing between us. Slowly, she leaned into me further, resting her cheek against my chest. I could feel the rhythm of her heartbeat, a comforting, grounding presence, and I wrapped my arms around her waist instinctively. There was no urgency, no need to speak. The rain, the warmth, The closeness said everything. Her hand slid to rest over mine, fingers interlacing naturally, and I realized we had reached the point where hesitation had no place. We stayed there for a long while, letting the world shrink to the space between us. The tension, the teasing, the long glances and brief touches. All of it culminated in this quiet moment of mutual acceptance. We didn't need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was in the subtlety, in the closeness, in the acknowledgement that we belonged here, together. As the rain softened to a drizzle, we finally pulled slightly apart, just enough to look at each other. Her smile was soft, warm, and steady. "We'll take it slow," she whispered, echoing the promise we had made earlier. "But I don't want to hide this anymore." And in that moment, I knew. We had crossed the line from tension to tenderness, from curiosity to connection. The age difference, the hesitation, the fear, all of it had led to this moment of clarity, and it was more beautiful than either of us had imagined. The days that followed felt different, though nothing had changed outwardly. We returned to our routines, but the unspoken understanding between us colored every interaction. Even the simplest moments, passing in the hallway, sharing a cup of tea, or brushing against each other while reaching for a book, carried the weight of shared intimacy. Each gesture, small and deliberate, reinforced the quiet bond we had nurtured over weeks of subtle touches and lingering glances. One afternoon, she invited me over for a casual evening, nothing more than cooking together in her kitchen while a soft playlist hummed in the background. I arrived to find her chopping vegetables with the same careful grace I had admired from the first moment I saw her. The scent of garlic and rosemary mingled with the warmth of the sunlight spilling through the windows. We moved naturally around each other, hands occasionally brushing, sometimes deliberately, sometimes by accident, but each touch sent a comforting spark of electricity through me. She laughed at my clumsy attempt to stir the sauce, and I reached over, letting my fingers graze hers as I guided the spoon alongside her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned just slightly into me, and in that closeness, I felt the culmination of all our small, slow moments together. After dinner, we carried our plates to the balcony, sitting side by side as the sun dipped low, casting a warm golden glow over the city. She rested her head on my shoulder, and I could feel the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, a quiet reassurance that we were here together, fully present in a moment neither rushed nor forced. The evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine from her balcony plants, mingling with the faint aroma of the meal we had shared, a sensory imprint of comfort, warmth, and intimacy. We talked about small things at first, the plans for the week, a book she was reading, a song I had discovered. But gradually, our conversation drifted into deeper territory, sharing hopes and dreams, fears and uncertainties. Her hand found mine again, and we intertwined fingers naturally, a silent affirmation that we were no longer just two people navigating proximity. We were a team, navigating life together. The evening ended not with dramatic declarations, but with quiet reassurance. She leaned against me one last time before I left, her cheek resting lightly on my shoulder. The warmth of that touch lingered long after I stepped out into the night. It was a promise, unspoken but understood. We had crossed the threshold from tentative fascination to meaningful companionship. In the days and weeks that followed, the rhythm of our relationship settled into something gentle, steady, and profoundly satisfying. There were no rushed confessions, no public displays of affection beyond what felt natural. Just shared mornings, quiet evenings, lingering touches, and the growing certainty that age and circumstance mattered little compared to the bond we had built. As I looked toward the future, I realized that the fascination, the tension, the hesitations, they had all been part of a journey that brought us here. And now, in the warmth of shared smiles, the comfort of simple touches, and the trust we had cultivated, I felt a quiet joy. This was not just the end of a story, but the beginning of something lasting, gentle, and beautifully real.